Good morning. Good morning. Sorry for the delay. Elizabeth May, Leader of the Green Party of Canada, Member of Parliament for Sandwich Gulf Islands. I'm joined today by Senator Rosa Galvez, who's been an extremely engaged and involved Senate member of the Senate on climate issues, and of course Mike Morris, Member of Parliament for Kitchener Centre. And it was Mike's request that led the Parliamentary Budget Office to do the review that they've done today and released today on fossil fuel subsidies. So we're going to start. I'm going to give the over to je donne la parole à Senator Rosa Galvez.
Merci. Yeah. Merci, Elisabeth. Bon matin. Thank you so much for being here today. So first, I would like to thank the Parliamentary Budget Officer, Mr. Yves Giroux. We've been having a sort of a virtual conversation. I ask questions and he brings reports and this with important information. So in this particular case, the report is called Update on the Energy Sector and Agriculture Federal Revenue Foregone from Tax Provisions. So this report highlights some deep issues with how our tax system and government subsidies favor the oil and gas sector, even as it fails to decarbonize in line with our climate commitments and provide evidence that the sector's contribution to our economy is not clearly or nearly as important as we all think. And we are waiting and expecting for disaggregated data and looking at what is really the component because it's under an umbrella that doesn't differentiate from the broader mining and quarrying sectors. In July 2021, Export Development Canada committed to achieve net zero emissions by 2050 across their business line and in their own global operation. A year later, in 2022, EDC's financing, loan, guarantees, and insurance to the oil and gas sector have increased more than $8.7 billion, and that is not counting the $25.5 billion that have gone towards facilitating Trans Mountain Pipeline through the Canada account. We have to resolve this issue in a holistic way, and this is exactly what our groundbreaking bill, the Climate Aligned Finance Act, proposes to do. All funding from all Crown corporations, such as the Export Development Canada, will have to go through a very detailed climate alignment screening process, resulting in an annual report. The bill will specifically amend the Export Development Act to modify EDC's environmental policies to ensure projects are screened for their potential negative climate change impact. With regard to the tax system, the bill mandates that the government, CAFA, mandates that the government come up with an action plan to ask the government to reflect on amending other fields of legislation, such as taxation, bankruptcy, and criminal laws to incentivize financial products and activities that align with climate commitments and disincentivize financial products and activities that are inconsistent with them. The plan will also focus on developing enforcement mechanisms against greenwashing. These are issues that will also be addressed if the government heeded the call of the 14 MPs, and I thank you so much for your support, from 4 parties behind Motion 84, to use all legislative and regulatory tools to align Canada's financial system with the Paris Agreement. We have a systemic issue when it comes to the climate, fossil fuels, and finance nexus. CAFA is our clarion call for the courageous legislative action. We need to address it. So thank you so much, and I will be ready to take questions if you have any. Thank you.
Mike.
First of all, I just want to say thank you, Senator Galvez, for your incredible leadership with the Climate Aligned Financing Act and your ability to bring parliamentarians together around it. To clarify, this report from the PBO this morning is actually in response both to Motion 77 that I've put on the floor of the House of Commons, as well as Senator Galvez's work. And so, Senator Galvez, again, thanks for your incredible leadership at such a really critical time. Again, the motion I've put forward that has been seconded by, of course, Elizabeth May, speaks to very clearly to have the Government of Canada and all financing and public support from both the government and Crown corporations directed to the production and expansion of fossil fuels. Today's report gives us some additional information that I think is really critical for us to understand the difference between the rhetoric being used and the actions being taken. Very specifically, as you heard from Senator Galvez earlier, today's report from the PBO shows that, in fact, since 2015, Export Development Canada has been increasing their subsidies to oil and gas, an increase of over $330 million over those years, as you heard from Senator Galvez, to now a total of $8.7 billion, separate and in addition to all of the public funds that continue to be directed to the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion, $3 billion more just last week, the same day we had a so-called emergency debate on wildfires that were ravaging the country. In addition, as a result of today's report, Environmental Defense, that has really been the authoritative organization sharing the numbers for total fossil fuels across the country, they have now updated their figures from a $20 billion annual subsidies to oil and gas. They now estimate it, based on these PBO numbers, to be $22 billion per year. And I want to also just share a really important letter from just a few weeks ago. 100 plus NGOs across the country who are now urging the federal government to follow through with a robust definition of fossil fuels, making sure that in this assessment framework that's to be announced over the coming weeks, that the government of Canada gets serious, that ultimately, in the midst of a climate crisis, this is the time to end subsidies to fossil fuels, to recognize that the window is closed and to take action, and to redirect those funds to the proven climate solutions we need. With that, I'll turn back to Elizabeth May for a word of closing, and we'll then take questions. Thank you to all the media who've joined us this afternoon. Thank you.
Oui, merci à Senator Galvez et puis aussi à mon cher collègue Mike Morris. Sur le rapport aujourd'hui du Bureau du directeur parlementaire du budget, c'est clairement, ce n'est pas une surprise. Malheureusement, ce n'est pas une surprise. Mais c'est clair que les subventions vers le secteur pétrolier, le secteur d'énergie fossile, a augmenté dans une période de temps après le gouvernement du Canada a accepté, été engagé pour l'accord de Paris. Depuis 2015, l'Exportation et Développement Canada a investi plus de 75 milliards de dollars dans la facilitation d'activités dans le secteur pétrolier et gazier. Ce n'est pas avec l'autre coup du gouvernement du Canada. Le gouvernement M. Trudeau a été engagé pour l'oléoduc de Trans Mountain. Les coûts maintenant, c'est presque 31 milliards. Ce n'est pas dans les subventions examinées dans ce rapport du bureau de directeur parlementaire du budget. So what we have here is Justin Trudeau in 2015 announced in Paris, Canada is back. We have increased the subsidies to fossil fuels. The Liberal election platform in 2015 said it would eliminate all subsidies. It's true that some forms of subsidies have gone down, while new ones have been created. In 2015, the government of Canada did not own a pipeline. The decision to buy the Kinder Morgan pipeline and continue to build it over the objections of First Nations and environmental and climate scientists is, to me, the single biggest outrage. But within that outrage, the Parliamentary Budget Office has found, not including the Trans Mountain Pipeline, additional subsidies, and the Export Development Canada continues to support fossil fuel development internationally, and that our other forms of subsidies, which are not mentioned in this report from Budget 2023, new ones created for using fossil fuels in the production of hydrogen, as well as for providing more money hand over fist to the fossil fuel industry for ineffective carbon capture and storage. We could go on, but I want to stop and make sure that we can answer all your questions. So please, as you ask a question en français ou anglais, s'il vous plaît, mentionnez qui des présentations ici, des députés, des sénateurs, tu veux répondre à votre question. So any questions? Yes.
Question for Senator Galvez. I think it was last year when you specifically asked for Export Development Canada's activities to be included in the Parliamentary Budget Officer report.
Yes.
And I'm wondering what role you see that entity playing when it comes to subsidies in public finance, because it's not something that's always very visible when you think about what goes towards this industry.
Thank you very much for the question. So it's been now several years I sit in the National Finance Committee, and so through the conversations with EDC and officials, it was very clear that there is certain opacity in the transactions and the activities and the financing, lending, investment of EDC, which initially were supposed to be just for exportation. But now it has, during the COVID, it has changed to domestic. And I know that the industry will say, well, don't combine things, don't mix things. There is one thing which is for the operations, and another thing is for our transitions. But the thing is that both of them makes lots of money that are not going to renewable energy, for example, and that we have in Canada so much potential for renewable energy that it's not, that it's a shame that we Canadians having so much potential, we are not using these low-hanging fruits that we have, and instead we are locked in this industry that unfortunately is not attaining the objective that themselves has fixed on the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions.
And so the government has made various commitments to phase out international fossil fuel subsidies, for instance, and then introducing an assessment framework we expect in the next month or so. For other fossil fuel subsidies, but it seems very complicated to distinguish what's a subsidy, what's public finance, so are these real differences, or are they?
Excellent question. Excellent question. At the end, if it's an assistance and it doesn't help to see clearly the results on greenhouse gas emissions reduction, then we are not attaining. It's not an efficient. United Nations has a definition of what is efficient and inefficient, and it's very large. And I think that the argument that we need to define our own reminds me the discussion about having to define our own taxonomy and having this gray area where we still encourage exploration and exploitation and production of oil gas. And just because we are in that subject, we have to say too that not all oils are the same. We have to remember that the oil sands are unfortunately with very high carbon print when you compare it, for example, to offshore petroleum in the Atlantic. And so, there might be questions about why you're helping them and we're not helping them. But at the end, what we should do is really coming out and transition to low carbon energy and electrification.
If I can just add one quick thing, just a small point. Canada has not committed to stopping subsidizing fossil fuels internationally. In Glasgow, the ministers announced that they would end subsidies for international fossil fuel development of quote-unquote unabated fossil fuels. And the question of whether abating fossil fuels is more than a shell game is an open question. It means, when you're starting a new coal mine or you're drilling somewhere, do you have the potential to have carbon capture and storage, which doesn't work and is very expensive?
I can't help but add, what will future generations think of us? That we were in the closing window of opportunity to invest in climate solutions, and we were so busy looking at what kind of fossil fuels subsidies we want to keep. I'll leave it there.
Yeah.
Just on that difference between, and this for everybody or anybody, between what the government says on climate change and what it does. We did a story today looking at spending on various climate initiatives and what they said they would spend in the budgets and what public accounts showed they'd actually spend. There was quite a large gap on several of these initiatives. They underspent by billions of dollars. So I'm wondering if that raises any concerns for you in the context of what you're talking about in general here, which is, you know, what the government says it does, what it actually does.
Well, certainly. First of all, just read the story this morning, so still digesting it. But there's a sad contrast between this reporting that shows the gap where the government isn't spending what it's committing to on good investments like the Low Carbon Economy Fund, and they're over-investing in the funds to subsidize the very industry most responsible for the crisis. And maybe not a surprise if you heard from me yesterday in question period that it's that same industry that's helping write the plans. It's deeply disappointing and really important for Canadians to see the gaps between what this government is committing to for spending and what they're actually following through on. So thank you for that work.
Yeah. I'm sure that journalists in this room are aware that the reporting to which Mike just refers was in the Narwhal, that Suncor and Shell helped Environment Canada and Climate Change write their plans. It does explain all of the indications that where they come through and overachieve, it's in things like spending $31 billion on a pipeline to ship bitumen for dangerous, risky tanker traffic out of the Port of Vancouver. And where they underspend is on the promises out the other side of their mouth for reducing greenhouse gases. Thank you very much. We're all available to continue if you want to have any conversations in the hallway. Just in summary, again, I wept with joy in Paris when Justin Trudeau took the stage and said Canada is back. I was so proud to be Canadian. I've been so ashamed at climate conference after climate conference with Stephen Harper as Prime Minister sabotaging. So I'm one of those Canadians who believe Justin Trudeau and feels profoundly cheated. And we are running out of time. The whole country is on fire, facing floods, facing extreme weather events. We have several days left in this place to put together what I've been demanding in Parliament, which is a nonpartisan approach across party lines to be prepared to save lives in the coming months from the climate disasters we can no longer avoid, while the government is avoiding taking those immediately necessary steps to avoid levels of climate crisis to which we cannot adapt. This is, as Mike says, the window is closing. What will future generations think of us? Thank you.
Recording stopped.